Hey everyone, it's James Frederick. Welcome to Washed. So this is a series of watercolors that I want to take you through, and it feels so good to be painting with watercolor. So for years I kind of avoided it. It's very unforgiving, and you have to really get into a thoughtful and deliberate state of mind when you work on these pieces. And I think another reason why I kind of steered clear was because my father was such an amazing watercolorist, and it felt like I needed to make my mark a different way. So, but it does feel good. It feels like I'm claiming my familial legacy to paint with watercolor like he did. So he was a working artist and he worked for the Air Force. He illustrated aircraft and did portraits of dignitaries. But he was trained at the Dayton Art Institute, and a lot of the pieces I'll share with you today of his are from that time, but he continued to paint with watercolor even as he courted and married my mother and started to raise a family. So interesting sidebar is that my father met my mother actually at the Dayton Art Institute. She was selling art supplies in a kiosk, and he was there attending school on the GI Bill after fighting in World War II as a Marine. So it's a great story. And if it weren't for art, then they wouldn't have met. So it feels really good to be painting with watercolor because of that history that it has with my family. And it felt really amazing. I may not have mentioned, but I have a couple of his pieces here in the gallery that I'm going to share with you, along with some other works of his. And it feels so good to have them in here in the gallery. I'm not sure if his work was ever shown in a gallery, so that is really awesome. But to have my work presented next to his is just quite an amazing thing. Like here is one of his amazing pieces. He painted large scale watercolors, which is a challenge for me. So, but I'm excited to be able to share with you that work after I take you through these 12 pieces. So I will put a link here in the description and you can get more information about any of these. I have 12 pieces to share, and then I will take you through a couple of his. All right, so here we go. I'll be giving you the dimensions of the actual painting and not the finished framed dimensions, but you can find those on the website. So the first piece is 7 by 7, and it's called Jetty Joy. And there'll be a little bit of reflection here with the UV acrylic on the front of these. So I will try to do my best to give you a nice, good view. So that one is Jetty Joy. This one is called Last of Land, and it's basically the very end of Cape Cod at Long Point, where the end of land happens. So that one is 7 by 10. And I have two smaller 5 by 5s here. This one is called Dune Roses. And this piece is called Beach Heather. And then I have a larger piece. It's 12 by 16. And it's called Solitude. And I love how this one came out. So this is a view of Seascape Dune Shack, which is one I've been able to stay at. And you can see the monument off in the distance there. It is definitely aptly named as Solitude because it's just such a great experience to be out there and away from everything and everyone. It kind of sits down in a little bit of bowl in the dunes. And this is where it all began, my watercolor journey. I started painting watercolors there last year when I got to stay at the shack. So that is a great reminder. And this piece is 7 by 7. It's called Wait for Wind. And it's just a view of these moored sailboats waiting for the right time to go out. So 7 by 7. This piece is 7 by 10. It's called Barrier Dune. And this is another look at Wood End out above the moors. There is a barrier dune that separates this wetland from the actual bay. So barrier dune. And this piece is called Gulf of Maine. So this is looking out to the Atlantic from the other side of the land mass. So rather than looking towards the bay, we're looking out towards the Atlantic from Truro, and that is often called the Gulf of Maine, that whole area of the Atlantic that runs from Massachusetts up to Maine. And this piece is called Beach Marker, and I love the contrast in this one. So this is a little sculpture made on the beach near the dune shack, actually, when you cross over the dune to the water. It's 5 by 5, and so was the prior piece. This piece is 12 by 12, and it's called Moonrise. Let's see if I can get the lighting to shift a little. For some reason, it's looking very yellow, but it's called Moonrise, and it's a view from head of the meadow during a blood moon as it was just coming up over the horizon. So it's called Moonrise. This one is 7 by 7, and it's called High Tide. And this is that same wetlands that we call the moors, and with the Wood End in the distance there, but it's at the point where the water is at its highest, so you don't see a lot of the breakwater. There's actually a few places where it becomes submerged at high tide. And then the last piece I'll share with you is called Sun Tea. And this piece, actually, I painted out there at the Dune Shack. So you can see that we put a picture of tea out to brew in the sun. It's 7 by 10, it's called Sun Tea. So that's the series of watercolors that I have for you. And then I do have a few pieces of my father, so I want to share with you this one, which I call Sweet Corn. This piece was not named that by him, but there is a billboard on top of this building that looks like it's alluding to sweet corn. He was such a master at watercolor. And I just love, especially the areas where, you know, he was able to keep these unpainted parts very white and create that contrast. Truly remarkable. This one's large. The watercolor itself is like 17.5 by 19.5. So it's hard to work with watercolor that large because it kind of has a mind of its own at a certain point, and I like to be able to control kind of a smaller area. But he was so good at it. And I have another one over on the other side of the gallery. So here's another one of his pieces. It's 14 by 20, so it's still large. And I love the kind of angry sky that he created. He was so good at the washes. Anyway, it's called, I don't know what it's called actually. There you can see his signature there. Yeah, this piece is probably from the later 40s. The earlier one I showed you was from 47. And the rest I'll share with you now digitally. And just a quick look at these other pieces. They all range from late 40s to early 50s. One of them is dated 1953. So they've held up fairly well. And they reside all over the country with various relatives. My aunt, my sisters. Such a great collection. And here are a couple images of the artist himself, my father, while he was working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So thanks for joining me for this journey. Again, you can get details here in the description. Also, last video I was sharing with you that we were doing an exhibition of photography from the Swim for Life, and that happened last weekend. And I do have a gallery of images from that event that you can see on my website, and there will be a link as well to the archives of the Swim for Life on my website. So that's under the events tab, but I'll put a link here for that specifically. And then as we're rounding out the season, I switched things up a bit for October. And instead of doing the 10 summers kind of retrospective that I was thinking of doing, instead I've decided to paint a body of small works, and I'm going to call that show The Little Things. And I am excited to do those. It'll be a range of representational and abstract and objects, all in time for the gift giving season. Everything will be 8 by 8 or 6 by 6 or 5 by 7, all very small paintings. So it's The Little Things. That is all I have for you today. Thanks again for joining and following me on my journey.